Hello and welcome to Mr. Terry's science class. Today you are going to be taking notes over metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. Right now you do not need to take notes yet, unless you just really want to. In a moment I'll show you exactly what I want you to write down on this document, which is your notes. But for right now you can just listen, and then you can pause the video and start writing down the notes that I want you to have in the journal. Okay, so I'm going to begin the presentation. Please listen carefully. Metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. This is the periodic table. These are the three categories that we will be studying mostly here in 6th grade. Everything in green is a metal, everything that is in blue is a metalloid, and everything in red is a non-metal. Okay, so here are some of the characteristics of a metal. Now, not all metals have the same characteristics. They're all a little bit different. Metals can be metallic or shiny and have luster. When I think of the word luster, I think of bling. So I think of gold and silver, but there's other things that can have luster as well. Metals are good conductors of heat and electricity. Some metals can be malleable, which means they are easily hammered into thin sheets. Think of aluminum foil, think of gold jewelry, silver jewelry, think of tin foil and aluminum cans. All of that is metal that can be worked with because it is malleable. Ductile. Some metals are ductile. Most metals are ductile. Some metals can be ductile, which means they can be pulled into thin wires. Think of wires inside of Christmas tree lights. Usually the metal that is in those wires is copper. Copper is very ductile. Metals have a high density, which means they're densely packed with atoms. Usually that means they're heavy. And they have a high melting point. So you have to get a really hot source of heat or flame to melt a metal. Some metals melt at room temperature, but most metals have a high melting point. And metals are usually solid at room temperature, except for mercury. This mercury is a liquid metal used in thermometers because it is liquid at room temperature. Metals easily lose electrons. So when that happens, when a metal loses electrons, one of the signs of a loss of electrons is when metals rust. So next is nonmetals. So here's some of the characteristics of nonmetals. Nonmetals appear to be dull in appearance, which means they do not have luster. Nonmetals are not malleable. They are not ductile. And they are very poor conductors of heat and electricity. So with nonmetals, you can't work them into shapes like you can with metals like gold or aluminum. They're not ductile. They can't be pulled into wires, and they do not conduct heat or electricity very well. Nonmetals, many of them are gases at room temperature, like oxygen that you're breathing right now. Solid nonmetals are usually brittle, which means they break easily, and more than 97% of your body is made of nonmetals. Nonmetals tend to gain electrons. That means they take electrons away from other elements when they interact with each other. And here's a diagram that represents most of the elements in the human body. Most of your body is made of oxygen. Some of it is made of, a lot of it is made of carbon. About 10% of your body is hydrogen, and the other 7% are rare elements, trace elements that exist in very small amounts. So now we're going to talk about the metalloids. This is our last category. Metalloids are the elements here in purple. They share unique characteristics. They kind of behave like metals in some cases, but they aren't really metals. That's why they're called metalloids. So here's the characteristics of metalloids. They have characteristics of metals and nonmetals. They are solids at room temperature. Some of them are shiny, some of them are dull, and many of them are conductors, but not as good as metals. One interesting thing about metalloids, like silicone, silicone does not conduct electricity very well unless it's at very high temperatures. So silicone is one of the conductors, metalloids, that's inside your smartphone right now that you are using to browse on the internet. You have a lot of silicone in there because it's a good conductor of electricity, but at high temperatures. And that is the end of the notes for metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. You are going to take this document here and you are going to write down the characteristics of each one. So let's do metals and nonmetals first. I want you to write all of these down. Write small and write neat, because you're going to need to know about these things. So let's do metals first. Put them in there. And then I'm going to change the font so that they all fit to 12. That should work right there. So there's our characteristics or properties of metals. I want you to write all of that down. Take your time, write very neatly. Now let's do nonmetals. You can pause the video if you need to now, or you can wait till I have all of these filled out. Let's do nonmetals next. So here is nonmetals. I'm going to fix our font. 12. That should work. Oh, I missed one. Okay, and one more. Let's do metalloids. It's our last. Not too many in here. Put that right there. And that should be complete. Okay, so you can pause the video now and take your notes. Make sure you write all of this down. Make sure you glue it into your journal on the correct page. If you're in Mr. Terry's class, as soon as you're done, you will have a video to watch that talks a little bit more about metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. Okay, thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.